If you have ever thought about starting your own podcast, you should check out Riverside. Riverside is an online recording studio that lets you record podcasts and video in studio quality from anywhere. And if you click on the affiliated link in the episode description and you buy a subscription, you will also be supporting the podcast. And if you're going to start your own podcast or you just want to continue to listen to great podcasts, you need headphones or speakers. If you click on the Amazon affiliated link, you can get great deals on headphones and speakers. And if you make a purchase, it will also help support the podcast. Both links will be in the episode description if you are interested. If you were a person that was ahead of your time, people in your time may have called you an innovator or a visionary. But if you look back on history, you will find that response was actually rare. People tend to be afraid of things and people that are different. They don't call them innovators or visionaries, but rather they call them weird, an outcast, or sometimes a witch. They shun them, they mock them, they envy them, and sometimes they even kill them. Hi, my name is Courtney Jewell, and you are listening to the 4th episode of the 2nd season of History Shelf, a podcast about history that proves that sometimes fact is even more interesting than fiction. For the 2nd season of History Shelf, I have chosen to title this season, Something Wicked This Way Comes. You may know that comes from the William Shakespeare play Macbeth. I am going to be talking each week this season about someone from history that was accused of witchcraft. But as we go along, you will find that the wicked I am referring to is not the ones that were accused, but rather the accusers. You will find that those accused were not obviously actually witches, but victims of people that were out for revenge and personal gain, and those caught up in the hysteria of it all. And for this week, I am talking about Gentile Budrioli. Gentile is known today as the Great Witch of Bologna. But before I talk about that, I want to rewind back to the late 15th century, because that's when the subject of this week's episode was alive. Gentile was born into a wealthy noble family in Bologna, Italy. Even though Gentile came from a well-to-do family, she didn't fit the mold of what was expected of a 15th century Italian noblewoman. Gentile stood out, and she refused to conform. She yearned to learn, especially when it came to science. She studied at the University of Bologna, and she learned from Franciscan monks. She was a gifted astrologist and herbal healer. Her healing ability gained her fame and attention, but not everyone was happy with all the attention Gentile was getting. Her father believed that his daughter was reaching too high for a woman. So her father arranged for Gentile to marry Alessandro Ciminieri. He hoped that Gentile would settle into married life and become a dutiful wife. Together, Gentile and Alessandro had 7 children. They had 3 daughters and 4 sons. Their son Carlo is the only child whose name is known. The vibrant and curious Gentile was bored with her married life. Getting married didn't kill her love of science like her father had hoped. And now she had the disapproval of another man, her husband. Her husband was furious when he found out that Gentile was taking classes at the University of Bologna. Gentile was also getting lessons in herbal healing from the Franciscan monk Silvestro. She was so interested in herbal healing that she was getting lessons from him every day. Gentile was smart, and she put her knowledge to good use. She helped people with both their physical and psychological medical needs. She was so smart and so good at providing medical care that she was considered better than any of the physicians in Bologna. One of Gentili's patients was Ginevra Sforza. Ginevra was the wife of Giovanni II Bentivoglio. Giovanni was the ruler of Bologna, so Gentili's work was attracting some big names. Ginevra turned to Gentili for help with pains from childbirth. Gentili and Ginevra became fast friends. They would sometimes spend the whole day talking and reading to each other. They bonded over their interest in esotericism. Esotericism is a Western form of spirituality that stresses the importance of individual effort to gain spiritual knowledge. It paid to rub elbows with the wife of the ruler of Bologna. Her friendship with Ginevra allowed her to rapidly make her way up the ranks in Bologna. Before no time, Gentili was a counselor at Giovanni's court. Gentili found success, but oftentimes, when people find success, others find envy. Before this story can go any further, I need to tell you about the Bentivoglios and their rival family, the Malvezzis. Piero Malvezzi plotted against the Bentivoglio family. In November of 1488, the plan was discovered, and Piero was exiled. So there was some bad blood between the two families. Keep that in mind as we go along. Like I said, success often causes jealousy in others, and that was the case with Gentili. People couldn't believe just how quickly she rose through the ranks. Other influential people of the city wasn't so taken with her as Ginevra was. People slandered Gentili's name. In 1498, one of Ginevra's and Giovanni's sons came down with an unknown illness. They, of course, turned to their friend and famous and experienced healer, Gentili. For several days, Gentili worked her best in trying to heal the child, but nothing she did made him better. The child ended up, unfortunately, dying. This was the opportunity that the Malvezzi family had been waiting for. Witchcraft accusations were not uncommon during this time. Superstition ran high, and people often used that for political and personal gain. And the local government had no reason to try and reduce these wild accusations, because they gained from each person that was accused of witchcraft. Those that were executed for witchcraft had all of their personal belongings divided up between the local government and the church. Some people used witchcraft accusations as a way to get back at their rivals, and that is what the Malvezzi family was doing when they accused Gentile Budrioli of witchcraft. As I mentioned earlier, the Bentivoglio family and the Malvezzi family were enemies. But the Malvezzis couldn't go after who they really wanted to go after, and that was Ginevra. But Gentili was not too big to accuse of witchcraft. So that is what they did. They accused her of witchcraft. They said that she made Ginevra and Giovanni's son sick and caused him to die by using witchcraft. They also accused her of other things that had gone wrong in Bologna. Giovanni apparently believed in Gentili's guilt, but it is possible that she was just used as a sacrifice to improve Giovanni's relationship with Pope Alexander VI, who was threatening to put Bologna under papal control. But what about Ginevra? This was her dear friend that she had spent countless hours with. Well, Ginevra said and did nothing for Gentili's defense. Maybe it was because she believed that her close friend was guilty. Or maybe she didn't want to possibly be punished as well. The Inquisition handled Gentili's case. The Inquisition was known to treat those accused of witchcraft harshly, especially women. Gentili had actually long been on the Inquisition's radar. She was an intelligent woman that was a healer, and she found her domestic life to be boring. So, of course, to the Inquisition, she had to be a witch. Gentili's home was raided, and apparently, evidence of witchcraft was found. The evidence was traces of blood, an assortment of cloaks, ampules with various liquids, and an altar. They had what they needed to put Gentili on trial. They didn't have a lack of witnesses that were willing to accuse Gentili of being a witch. One of the witnesses was even her own husband. He said that she cast a spell on him that hampered with his intellect. One of her servants claimed that Gentili taught her a love spell, and someone claimed that Gentili had cast a spell on her own brother equally. Others said that she used the stars to tell the future. It was not hard to convince people in 1498 that a woman that was a healer and into astrology was a witch. After the trial, Gentili's house was raided again, and they magically found more evidence of witchcraft. They found desecrated holy symbols, another altar with images of Lucifer, 12 bags of human organs, and bones stolen from a cemetery. The Inquisition had witnesses and they had evidence, but what they really wanted was a confession. Gentili was tortured for several days. At first, Gentili refused to give in to the torture and confess, but when her interrogators were about to cut off her limbs, she confessed to be a witch, even though she was innocent. Here is her confession that has been translated into English. Quote, "Oh, for heaven's sake, take me away from these pains of hell. I will say anything. I confess to everything that was raised against me by the witnesses. Is that not enough for you, gentlemen? Let me hug my children and husband once more, and then kill me." End quote. In the morning on July 14th, 1498, Gentili was taken to Piazza San Domenico. There, Gentili was hanged while being burnt. The officials wanted to entertain the audience at Gentili's execution, and so they threw gunpowder on the fire. Many thought that the extra flames was the devil himself coming for Gentili's soul. After the last flame burned out, Gentili's ashes were collected and scattered to the wind. Across the street was Ginevra. She was in Gentili's home, crying for the friend that she lost. Though Ginevra didn't do anything to save Gentili, possibly because she couldn't do anything, she did make sure she looked after Gentili's daughters. She arranged either a good marriage for them or she put them into a convent. Today, Gentili's legacy lives on. She is remembered as the Great Witch of Bologna, but she is also remembered for her smarts and her boldness. On the episode that I did on Dame Alice Kittler 3 weeks ago, I told you that I would be covering more people that have musicals written about them this season. In 2011, a musical was written by the Accademia Culturale dei Castelli in Aria about Gentili's friendship with Ginevra, titled Ginevra and Gentili. And in 2018, Italian writer Barbara Baldaraldi named her as one of the many women throughout history who has had to pay a steep price for being ahead of their time. Gentili was ahead of her time. She was wise beyond her years. She refused to fit into a box that so many women in history have been forced into, and she had to pay the ultimate price. And that was the life of Gentile Budrioli. Thank you so much for listening to the 4th episode of the 2nd season of History Shelf. There are 15 episodes planned for this season. Next week's episode is going to be about Agnes Waterhouse. I hope you come back for that. A few things before I go. If you want to follow this podcast on social media, the Twitter is at History Shelf Pod, the Instagram is at History_Shelf_pod, and the Facebook page is History Shelf Podcast. If you want to help out this podcast financially, there are a few ways that you can do that. One is you can buy merch from the History Shelf merch store. There is a link to the merch store on this podcast's Twitter page. It is underneath the bio. I will also put a link to the merch store in the episode description for this episode. You can also become a Patreon. This podcast is always going to be free, but there are some perks that come along with becoming a Patreon. The first tier is called History Student. That is $1 a month. With that, you get a thank you tweet. The second tier is called History Fan. That is $3 a month. With that, you get the first tier, plus you get to vote in a poll that helps me choose the theme for the next season of this podcast. The third tier is called History Buff. That is $20 a month. With that, you will get the first 2 tiers, plus you will get a handwritten note of thanks mailed to you from me. And the last tier is called History Lover. That is $40 a month. With that, you get the first 3 tiers, plus you get to choose one item from the History Shelf merch store. There is another way that you can help support this podcast financially. If you are listening on Anchor and you don't want any of the perks from Patreon, you don't want any merch, but you still want to help out this podcast financially, you can do that. I have listener support on, and you can contribute that way. But as always, the best way that you can support this show is to continue to listen to this podcast. There are a few other ways that you can help out for free. One is if you are listening on a platform that lets you rate this podcast 5 stars. If you do that, that will be very helpful. I know there are also some platforms where you can write out a review. So if you write a positive review, that will help out the podcast. Also, sharing this podcast on social media and telling your friends and family that you've found a podcast that you think that they will enjoy will help grow the podcast. All right. Well, until next time, keep learning, keep loving history, and come back for next week's episode. Bye.